Hey guys, I'm FatBuddyCat, and this is the Ultimate Torque Bug 3.0. Alright, today we're going to finish assembling this awesome little mini bike. And hopefully we'll have it up and running with some parts from my friends at OMB Warehouse.com. The first thing we're going to be installing is a Wildcat WC22 26mm carburetor. These come with everything you need, including the EC short billet manifold adapter. This thing is awesome. However, we're going to be making a change up. For this installation, we're going to be using this new angled manifold from OMB. This is a cast manifold, and it's designed to work with engines that are on an angled mount. Found commonly on vintage bikes and go-karts that have the 15-degree plate on them. It doesn't quite fit this particular frame, but it will on a lot of others. This manifold can also be mounted in a flat position and ran that way as well. Today, that's what we're after. Even though we're not going to be using this bad boy right here, we are going to borrow some of the hardware. Those long bolts and those studs, they're coming out of there. We'll also need the carburetor, the air filter, and maybe these hoses. Doesn't leave a lot left, but hey, we'll use that somewhere else. I'm also going to be using a couple 10mm nylock nuts. Those are going to be for the studs. We're going to be using those first. They're going to hold the adapter onto the intake port itself. These studs have two different ends. We're going to make sure that the one with the hole for the Allen's wrench is facing outward. And I'm just finger tightening them and making sure that I have plenty of thread for a gasket, manifold, and our nylock nut. This angled manifold comes set up with a fuel inlet. I'm not sure that it's threaded in, but we're going to go ahead and leave it there for now. It also had this little red protective cap. Some gaskets. I think I threw those bolts in there. And a nice piece of fuel line. Got a freshie on there. And now the manifold. I'm going to set the threads where I'm comfortable, and I'm going to grab my nylock nuts, a small 10-inch wrench, and an Allen's for this. I believe these are 3mm. I just threaded my nuts on so that I'm right up to the nylocks. Now I'm going to use my 10mm and this Allen's, and I'm going to back thread the Allen's through the nut. That way I have a couple threads on the smart end. Now that these are hand tight, I'm going to be using my Allen's and my 10mm like jam nuts. I'll hold one, I'll bring one in tight, make sure the other one doesn't spin. We'll see how this holds. I think I have enough threads to do a lock washer too, if need be. That's on there. I'm going to be using these to attach the carburetor to the manifold. They have a low profile head that doesn't interfere with the choke lever cylinder. They can slide by. I'm going to see if I have a couple small washers or lock washers that I can get in there. I'm really lucking out today. I had one of these small steelies and a little lock washer. It'll work just fine. On the choke side, I'm holding the washers up so that the bolt can pass by that cylinder I was talking about. It won't pass by with the washers next to the head. That was the hard one. We're gonna have all kinds of threads there, boys. That one slides right in. Just grab my wrench, go over the manifold, and well, pretty much do the same thing. Hand tighten, and then back and forth with the torque until I feel it's at home. Got to be careful and make sure you set your gasket. These are going to screw right in to the billet portion of the manifold. Kind of hard to mess this up. So close. Remember, these are for a different installation. I didn't force anything, so I didn't mess any threads up. Just brought them in, and then all of a sudden they said, hey man, those aren't going any further. We're going to need to add some washers. We had too much thread. You know who doesn't have too many threads? These guys back here. I think we're going to switch them up. Aren't you glad I get to try this first? Might as well start fresh. We got a whole pack of them. This thing didn't come with instructions, but check this out. If you come in at the right angle, you can get it most of the way there. I'm not going to take it all the way with this because I don't want to strip it, but I get it close. I get my shorty, bring that one home. The same thing on this side. Nice and even. I have my nuts and my studs set on the carburetor. You got to do it that way because of that choke cylinder. So what I'm going to do now is put the carburetor to the billet section. I'm going to hand tighten the threads in till they stop, which we know they're going to do, and then I'll have to use the nuts to bring the carburetor home on the threads while holding the end of the stud with the Allens. This really isn't that hard. You can get in back here with your 10mm and then come around and get the Allens in and work that back stud. You got to juggle the nut, because if you try to hand tighten that back stud in, it'll back out and push the nut up against that choke cylinder. So you got to work them both at the same time. I just set a couple, 4 or 5 threads on this outside one when I worked that one. Now I can go back and bring this one in to where the stud stops. Almost there. Alright. Now I'll go back, I'll hold my studs, and I'll bring it the rest of the way in with my nuts. That, my friends, is a very solid mount. That's something to be proud of. I see that it's angled down a little bit, but I think gravity is going to be in our favor. We also have the option for a fuel pump, just in case this doesn't work. We know what will. I have a spare filter that I had used on another build. We're going to try this out on this application as well. I'm really glad I went with that filter. It adds to the natural lines of this manifold and carburetor setup. It's not exactly built for rainy days, but I think it's going to work all right, even at that little bit of an angle. Next, we're going to run that throttle cable, and then we'll do the fuel line. I'm a big fan of these Mikuni linkages. These allow you to use 2 separate cables, and then you just need something to combine them in the middle. That way it's one continuous throttle cable. Today I'm going to be using this cable stop. This gets even better. for the cables today, I'm going to be using some old junkers I got laying around. Why not? They're still good. This one has the end that's going to connect to the slide inside the carburetor. This one got a little minged up along the way, but it has the end that's going to go inside our throttle. I'm just going to remove this one from this linkage. We're going to be cutting it probably somewhere around here. To figure out if our short end is long enough, we have to install the linkage itself onto our engine. It's going to connect on the coil starter. On the coil starter, there's already going to be a threaded section over here. There's not going to be one on the top. I went to the hardware store and I bought one of these little insert style clips that you can thread one of these through. Right now I have this coil starter loose enough that I can pull it away. You can see that there's a hole back there, but there's no threads. You can take the whole thing apart and put this together using a bolt and a nylock nut, but I don't want something that could ever come loose inside my fan shroud. Also, it's more work. So, I cut the corners of this clip. Usually they are square and they have like a tail to them where it's kind of flared. I snipped that off. You can also do it really easily on a bench grinder. It just took me 2 hands to get it in place, but you can see why I clip that tail off and clip those edges. It'll go down. I'll probably have to use the tip of my screwdriver or something, but it'll go down far enough that we can get that little bolt through. We might even get it right there. It'll thread. I just added lock washer. You see what I mean? The only reason it has to line up with that hole is so when it passes through the clip and the threads, it has something to go into. That way when we tighten this thing home, it sits flush. Alright, so it's not perfectly flush, but it's not going anywhere. And I don't think it's gonna be in our way. Everything seems to be in working order. Well, that was sort of a bust. The short end with the barrel that I need for the Mikuni just isn't quite going to make it. The cable itself would only fall to right about there, let alone the short conduit. We could use this other minged up piece, but it only has the end for the twist throttle. I don't have any more cutoffs with the Mikuni end, so we're now using a fresh throttle cable. The idea, we want a gentle swoosh from here back to the carburetor. I can either use a piece of this conduit or another, but I'm going to need the cable. It's on the inside no matter what. I like my gentle swoosh right about there. I'm going to cut my cable and the conduit and everything right there. The reason I cut this long is so that I can cut the conduit back and expose some bare cable. I just nip this with a micro disc. It looks like I got a pretty clean cut. In order to pull the cable back in, I just have to make sure that I pull this up and away from the carburetor enough that I pull the inside cable back and it leaves an empty shroud. We'll cut that again, feed the conduit back towards the carburetor, and the end of our cable that's in there should come poking out. There we are, pulled away from the carb, and the end cut. Make sure this end is down inside. Come back up here. Wham bam bla jam. We got a freshie, guys. Now we can feed this into this end. And that's what we got. It's not too bad, but it could be a little shorter. I'm going to trim the conduit back a little bit more. I took about 3 inches off, and I'm loving it. Plenty of cable to combine the two. Now, just have to rig up the other end. I already have the housing off, and we're just going to use that old junker I had. I'm going to hook up this end to the tube, reassemble the housing, and then I'll come back to you. I just routed my cable the way I want it to. It's coming down right here. I want to leave it so that no matter which way I steer the bike, it's not too tight and it doesn't pull itself out of the linkage. When you're cutting this end to length, you have to remove it from the housing. That way you can pull the line back through and then make your cut. So I'll find where I want it. I'll make my mark. I'll take this apart. I'll pull the cable out so that I know I'm past that mark. I'll cut it, reinstall it, and when I'm done, I should have a healthy piece of naked cable and a good size section of conduit cut off. Oh yeah, we got plenty to work with. I'm going to loop this in through the linkage, and then I'm going to grab that cable stop I had, and I'm going to use that to combine these two ends. When you're tightening it on, you want to make sure that the cable can come to the full throttle closed position without the stop interfering with that adjuster. If that didn't make full return right there, you wouldn't make it over here. So when you start the motor, your throttle will be partially open. We have full movement. There's just a little bit of play right here, and I know we can get that out. Much better. Oh yeah. Typically, I would switch to Tygon for a fuel line, and this might even be. It's just a different brand, and it came with this manifold. I think it's just enough too. I have a fuel shutoff, a new filter. Those go on the carburetor for the overflow. This one we don't need. And I did get a few of these adapters just in case I had to change sizes. I wasn't sure if we were going to have to jump up to quarter for the petcock on the bottom of the tank itself, but I know I can get this stuff to squeeze, so we're gonna rock with it. Here's what I got rigged up. This end goes to the petcock on the gas tank, comes down through the filter to our inline shut-off valve, and then it'll go to the carb, and I'll have to trim something off when we find where that is. We even had a little bit to spare. We kept it nice and clean, nice and direct. I know that the petcock has this shut off here, but I'm a fan of having it right next to the carburetor and the choke. That way, I don't forget. The last two things on the workbench that are going to our carburetor are the overflow line and this little red vacuum cap. I'm going to have to find something to tie my overflow line off onto. I don't like to just leave them dangling. At least put a zip tie to something so that it's shooting off to the side and it can't just fly off. This red cap is going to go right over that inlet that's on the manifold. That's where a fuel pump line would go in. We're really getting down to it now. One of the last things is the exhaust. This is a right side exit header. These are one of my favorites. In my opinion, it's also one of the strongest. This header goes from the left side, has a crossover through the frame, and then exits towards the rear on the right. Quick sand papes. The old lacquer thinner rag. High heat grill paint. While the header's drying, I'm going to take my time to install a kill switch. I'm a double switch man myself, so I took the stock unit off and replaced it with one that already has the wire leads for a remote source. I'm going to cut back all my excess, and then we'll take a look. With everything trimmed back, we end up with a very clean installation. I just ran my brake line and my wires together. This nice little loop right back down to the kill center. The next morning, and our header is looking absolutely gorgeous. I can't wait to get it on the mini bike. I made sure to add a new gasket, and I also take my shop vac and I gently run it past my port and make sure that there's nothing in there. One of my favorite things about this header, 1/2-inch ratchet, you get right in there. I don't have to fuss with a wrench. On some of them, you end up messing around with short wrenches and you're not even sure if you're completely tight. Well, I'm pretty sure here. This crosses over through the center and makes its exit safely away from the frame and our air filter. This is where we have options. With this beefy header, we can run it straight. We can put something on the end, or we could add an RLV. If I used a slip-on with the clamp, I would cut this pipe probably somewhere around there, and I would let my RLV hang out. Reason being, well, extra weight on the end of the pipe is going to cause it to vibrate more. You can add header support, do all that, but for this little rocket, I got a better idea. We're cutting straight to a power horn. I'm going to clamp a 1-inch trumpet right on the end. Typically, I like to have the bolt on my RLV clamp on the bottom. It looks a whole lot better. The problem is we're working with two different angles, and when this is on the bottom, it runs plain, you can see here, see how it cuts back, with the frame. So we don't want to just be racking these threads off it when it's vibrating and running, or even chance that. At this point, we can make an adjustment. We have to be careful for is the actual trumpet. As we move this thing back, if I take the clamp off, a little 10 millimeter. Oh, I can probably just turn it. There we go. So, we're looking out for this fluted section, right? Again, we don't want to be right next to the frame. We're not touching it, but when things get to doing their thing, well, we'll probably make contact at some point. Right there, I'm just outside of my air filter. I could come out, and that'll get us further away from both points. I think I'd like to come right about there. Yeah, that's not too bad. This header and this intake sort of follow the same line, and it has a nice cut back look to it. So I'm going to make my mark somewhere around this area. That way when I cut it and I slip my trumpet on, I have plenty of cyborg meat. Yep. I think we nailed it there. Well, I guess there's only one other thing to do. We gotta put gas in this thing. See if it even runs. The Torquezilla isn't tightened on. I'm going to remove that and the belt. I just put some fresh gas in the tank. Turn that on, and when we open this, it should fill. There we go. Our carburetor is live. I haven't touched any of the adjustments. Everything is going to be accessible from the side, so that's pretty sweet. Alright, I made a few adjustments just so we can get a start. Set fuel on. See if we can't figure out what that little leakage is about. I think we got a runner. So we're below the engagement point. That's really good. I didn't build it to stare at it. I think you guys know what time it is. This little Doodlebug gets right down to business. The acceleration is absolutely nuts. It's just a little 196, guys. But I think we can do a little better. No matter what, we better hold on tight, because this is definitely a work in progress. Have a good night. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.